All right, deep divers, buckle up, because today we are diving into some seriously deep waters. The psychology of relationships.
Ooh, juicy.
Right. So
Yeah.
get this. Are relationships, all relationships, are they all just coping mechanisms?
Whoa. Okay, hit me with this outline.
Okay, so we're working with, looks like some kind of podcast planning doc, right?
Yeah.
But it's got some really, really interesting points about love, about loneliness,
Okay.
all of it. And like, it jumps right in, like no messing around with this question. Are relationships merely coping mechanisms?
Well, I mean, that's a loaded question, right? To even like try to unpack that.
I know.
You got to back up. Define coping mechanism. What does that even mean?
Exactly. So what do you think when you hear coping mechanism? What pops into your head?
Well, I mean, we're talking about like how we deal with life, right?
Yeah.
The stress, the anxieties, the uncertainty of it all. We as humans, we develop these patterns, these like strategies to manage, right?
Totally.
Could be something as simple as like, oh, I need to take a walk to clear my head. Or it can get way more complex, like, building up those emotional walls.
Yeah.
So some coping mechanisms are healthy, they're productive.
Yeah.
And then, well, there's the other ones.
Right. And that's where relationships come in, right?
Yeah.
Because this outline, it highlights how crucial relationships can be for support, especially when things get rough.
Oh, absolutely. Like, think about a time you went through something really tough. Who did you turn to?
Oh, for sure, your person.
Exactly.
Right.
It's natural to seek comfort from loved ones. It's healthy most of the time.
Okay.
But here's the thing. There's a fine line between healthy support and leaning too heavily, becoming like overly reliant on someone else.
Okay, so how do you recognize that line? What's the difference?
So in a healthy dynamic, both people can depend on each other
Right.
without losing themselves.
Yeah.
It's about maintaining your own identity, your own independence, while still having that support system. But sometimes, and this is where it gets tricky, a relationship can become a crutch. It's like, we avoid dealing with our own stuff, our own growth, by leaning on someone else a bit too much.
Ah, I see. And it makes me think about those times in life when we might be particularly prone to seeking that kind of, I don't know, unhealthy reliance.
Yeah.
This outline, it goes there. It talks about how past traumas can really influence our relationships today.
Yeah, trauma's a big one. I mean, it can really change how we see ourselves, how we see other people, even just how we interact with the world,
Oh, for sure.
Like it shapes what we believe we deserve, what real love should look like. And sometimes, and this isn't about diagnosing anyone,
Right.
but sometimes unresolved trauma can lead us to seek out relationships that feel familiar, even if those patterns aren't healthy, even if they kind of resemble those early wounds.
Wow. So it's almost like we're drawn to what we know, even if it's not good for us.
Right, exactly. And, there's this other theory this outline mentions, attachment theory.
Yeah.
It basically says that those very first bonds we form, especially with like our parents or primary caregivers, that those bonds create a template for all our future relationships.
So you're saying our childhoods can actually affect how we approach romance as adults.
Totally. So think about it. Let's say you had a caregiver who was, I don't know, emotionally inconsistent.
Okay.
Sometimes they're loving and attentive, and then other times distant or rejecting.
Right.
That can lead to what's called an anxious attachment style later in life,
Okay.
where you crave closeness,
Yeah.
but you're also terrified of being abandoned.
Oh, wow. That makes so much sense.
Right.
Like a self-fulfilling prophecy almost.
Exactly.
Okay. So we've talked about trauma. We've talked about attachment styles.
Right.
Let's talk about another big one. Loneliness. I mean, everyone's felt lonely at some point. But how much do you think that fear of ending up alone, how much does that drive our relationship choices?
Oh, it's huge. We are hardwired to connect, right?
Yeah.
To belong. It's in our
Yeah.
DNA. But then on top of that, there's this societal pressure, like being single somehow means you're incomplete. It's this unspoken message that really amplifies that fear of being alone.
And it can push us toward relationships that maybe aren't right for us.
Exactly.
So, okay, we've got all these factors at play: trauma, attachment, societal pressure. How do we even begin to tell the difference between a relationship that's like genuinely healthy, loving,
Right, yeah.
versus one that's more about filling a void, coping with something deeper?
$1 million question, right?
It is.
It takes a lot of self-awareness. You got to look inward. And this outline mentions these red flags,
Okay.
signs that a relationship might be more about coping than, true connection.
Like what? What are some red flags?
So think about things like excessive neediness, always having to be around the other person, possessiveness, jealousy,
Yeah.
an inability to function independently, like you can't be alone with your own thoughts. These can all be signs that something's a little off.
That's really insightful. I can definitely see how those could be warning signs. Now, this outline isn't all doom and gloom.
Right.
It also talks about the possibility of breaking free from those unhealthy patterns, those cycles.
Yeah.
How do we do that? How do we even start?
It's a journey, not a sprint. It takes time.
Right.
It's about understanding your own patterns, your motivations. Therapy can be incredibly powerful for that.
Oh, for sure.
It gives you a safe space to unpack things, to develop those healthier coping strategies. And then there's self-discovery, mindfulness practices,
Right.
making conscious choices to build relationships from a place of, like, wholeness, not neediness.
So it's almost like we have to learn how to be okay on our own before we can be truly okay with someone else.
Exactly. It's like that saying, you complete me. It's romantic, but in reality, you have to be whole on your own.
So I guess that brings us back to our original question.
Yeah.
Is love just a coping mechanism?
Right. I mean, is there even a simple answer to that? Maybe it's not about a yes or a no.
Right.
Maybe it's about realizing that relationships exist on a spectrum. They can bring us so much joy, so much growth,
Absolutely.
but they can also reflect our deepest insecurities, our wounds. The key is self-awareness, understanding ourselves and why we make the choices we make in love.
Beautifully put. And listeners, here's something to chew on. What if the most radical act of self-love is learning to build relationships that are both a source of comfort and a catalyst for personal growth?
I like that.
Think about it.